Hey everyone, have you ever wondered how a poor agricultural country can transform into a rich industrial powerhouse? It's a huge question, right? One that economists have puzzled over for centuries. Well, today, we're going to tackle that exact puzzle by looking at one of the most famous theories out there. So, let's dive right in. All right, picture this. You've got a country with a massive population, but not a lot of land. Most people are working in farming, but here's the catch. There are way more people working on the farms than are actually needed. So how does a country like that even begin its journey toward development? It's a classic problem, but there's a really fascinating solution that was proposed. The solution to this complex problem came back in 1954 from a Nobel Prize-winning economist, Sir W. Arthur Lewis. His idea sounded incredibly simple, but it was also incredibly powerful. He suggested that we shouldn't look at this economy as one single thing, but instead, we should split it into two distinct sectors. And that one simple idea completely changed how we think about economic development. So what are these two sectors? Well, first, you have the subsistence sector. Think of this as the traditional agricultural part of the country. People here are working, sure, but their output, their productivity is really low. This is where we see that disguised unemployment. Basically, you could take some people off the farms and the total harvest would stay exactly the same. Then you have the capitalist sector. This is the modern industrial part of the economy. The cities with factories, mines, and machines. Here, productivity is high and people are paid wages to generate profit. So what was Lewis's big idea? It was this. Take that surplus labor, those extra workers in agriculture we just talked about, and move them from the countryside into the city factories. Since they weren't really adding to the farm's output anyway, taking them away wouldn't hurt agriculture at all. This, he argued, created an unlimited supply of labor that could become the engine for the entire country's growth. Okay, now we get to the heart of the theory. This graph. I know, it might look a little technical, but don't worry, we're going to break it down step by step in really simple terms. Let's see how this engine of growth actually works. So, have a look here. The line marked OS represents the wage you'd get back on the farm. Now, the line OW is the factory wage. You'll notice it's set just a little bit higher. That's the incentive to get people to move to the city for work. But here's the absolutely crucial part. The value of what a worker produces in the factory is way higher than the wage they're paid. And that gap, the difference between what a worker is paid and the value of what they produce, that's where the magic happens. This area you see here, labeled WP1Q1, is what Lewis called the capitalist surplus. In plain English, it's pure profit for the factory owner. So what happens to all this profit? This is the key. According to Lewis, the capitalists don't just spend this money, they reinvest it. They build more factories, and more factories mean they need to hire more workers from the villages. This in turn generates an even bigger surplus, an even bigger profit. It's a virtuous cycle of growth that just keeps feeding itself. Let's go back to the graph. When that surplus is reinvested, you see the entire productivity curve shift upwards, from P1L1 to P2L2. What does that actually mean? It means the economy can now employ more people, moving from N1 to N2, and the total profit, that capitalist surplus, gets bigger too, growing from that first area to the new, larger area of WP2Q2. This cycle is what drives economic growth forward. So the big question is, can this process of growth just go on forever? Can a country just ride this cycle all the way to becoming rich? Well, according to Sir Arthur Lewis himself, no, there's a limit. This engine eventually runs out of steam. So when does the growth engine stop? Well, a few things can happen. For one, you could simply run out of surplus labor in the villages. Or food could get more expensive, which forces factory owners to pay higher wages. Another possibility is that the subsistence sector itself becomes more productive, so farm wages naturally rise. And finally, factory workers might unionize and demand better pay. In any of these cases, the capitalist surplus, that profit margin, starts to shrink, and the pace of reinvestment slows down. The theory sounds pretty neat and straightforward, doesn't it? But is the real world really that simple? Well, like any big theory, economists have raised some really important questions about Lewis's model. Let's take a look at a few of the main criticisms. First up is a critical assumption about wages. The model assumes that factory wages will stay low and constant as long as there's surplus labor in the countryside. But in reality, that's often not the case. Thanks to things like trade unions and government pressure, wages in industrial sectors can, and often do, rise, even when there's still a high unemployment in rural areas. Here's another big one. The model kind of assumes that all the reinvested profit goes into creating more jobs. But what if a factory owner uses their profits to buy a new, modern machine that does the work of 10 people? Production goes up, for sure, but new jobs aren't created. This is what we call labor-saving technology, and it's a huge challenge to this model. And there are other real-world problems too. For instance, factories don't just need bodies, they need skilled labor. Training millions of people takes a very, very long time. Plus, people are often really reluctant to just up and leave their homes, their families, and their communities to move to a strange city. And finally, many economists today would argue that the basic idea that the marginal productivity of labor on a farm is truly zero, well, they just don't buy it. But, despite all these criticisms, the theory's greatest strength is its clarity. It explains in a really clear-cut way the fundamental process of how a nation can go from being agricultural to industrial. It might have its flaws, but this theory really laid the foundation for the entire field of development economics. So in the end, this whole explainer leaves us with a fundamental question. Is a nation's surplus population a burden, or is it actually its greatest hidden asset, just waiting to be unlocked? Something to think about. Thanks so much for joining us.